The twin suns of Thalmyra bled across the sky, casting sheets of molten gold over a planet that no longer knew peace. The once grand expanse of the upper plateau, once known for its sky bridges and crystal observatories, was now reduced to a splintered graveyard of collapsed towers and melted walkways. The wind screamed through broken hulls, dragging ash and powdered glass across the wreckage like a forgotten god dragging a mourning veil. Kalen moved alone, each step crunching over bone-dry circuitry and scorched plating. His armor bore the grime of days spent crawling through the aftermath of the battle for the Azure Front, its exoskin patched with quick seal and prayer. The rest of his unit had vanished into static after the drop transport spiraled into the dunes. The chain of command was silent. His HUD flickered occasionally, phantom pings, false alerts, but he'd long since learned to stop hoping for a rescue signal. Below the skeletal remains of what had once been a skyport control tower, something shifted. Not debris, not wind. Something different. A presence. Faint at first, no louder than a strained breath, but it called to him wordless organic wrong. He moved toward the sound, navigating a snarl of rebar and collapsed crystal walls. The air thickened with the scent of ozone and cauterized flesh. Nestled in the shadow of a half-buried skiff lay a figure armored, still breathing, and unmistakably alien. She lay as if fallen from orbit limbs, splayed, but posture defiant even in unconsciousness. Her armor, regal obsidian engraved with a crest of burning spires, was shattered across one shoulder. Violet skin, bruised and torn, showed through between the breaks and plating. Glowing blood, viscous and gold like sunlight trapped in syrup, pulsed from her ribs, soaking the sands. Her body was both beautiful and brutal. Taller than a human by nearly a head, with muscle beneath form and steel beneath grace. Her fingers twitched, not in defense but in defiance, some remnant of will refusing to shut down. Kalen recognized her instantly. The crown-shaped crest on her collar confirmed it. This was Vaelira Scion of the Thalmyric throne, warlord of the Southern Moons and the most feared military commander in the Dominion Pact's expansion fleet. Every data slate from High Command had warned about her. Her image was etched into the holographic minds of entire battalions as a reminder of the line between fear and awe. But she was no longer a symbol of terror. She was broken, half-buried, and still bleeding. She had been left behind. Her own kind must have abandoned her in the chaos, perhaps assuming she'd already fallen, or perhaps judging her life less valuable than the tactical retreat of their remaining forces. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. She was here alive and utterly alone. Kalen's instincts divided like a split neural thread. Training demanded retreat or termination. Survival required indifference, but something in him refused to comply. He dropped to a knee beside her body. Her pulse was weak but present. Cracks ran through her breathing mask, exposing her skin to the dry alkali dust of Thalmyra's air, a slow death sentence if left untreated. One leg was crushed beneath the warped remains of a drop beam, the other bent at an angle that suggested a dislocated hip or worse. He could have walked away. He should have. Instead, he placed a stabilizing brace beneath her ribcage, locking her breathing into rhythm. Then came the real burden, the brutal lift of a body built heavier and denser than his own. Her armor alone weighed more than most combat drones, but he pressed through the pain and heaved her onto his shoulder, fighting the weight with every fiber of his own. The landscape stretched outward in an ocean of ruin. Burned domes, twisted towers, shattered canopies, all reduced to broken silhouettes against a burning sky. Kalen found a narrow channel in the canyon walls, barely protected from aerial scan. The footing was unstable, the rocks loose and powder dry, but it would suffice. His own injuries flared as he moved, muscle tears reawakening old fractures throbbing under strain. But he pushed forward step by painful step, carrying the weight of a life he wasn't supposed to value. As night fell, the temperature collapsed. The suns vanished behind a red storm wall, and the desert's warmth drained into the void. Kalen huddled in the shallow cave he had claimed, wrapping her body in survival fabric and sealing the worst of her wounds with emergency foam. Her armor steamed faintly in the cold heat, escaping in ghostly wisps. Her chest rose and fell with a mechanic fragility, as though life clung to her out of obligation, not desire. She never woke, but her fingers twitched occasionally in half-conscious reflex. Not once did she lash out. Not once did she retreat into combat instinct. Kalen did not understand what he was doing. He only understood that the silence of the ruins no longer felt empty. The weight on his back had become more than just armor. It was the collapse of protocol, the erosion of absolutes. And something within him, a quiet, strange part of him, felt less alone than before. He kept watch through the long, starless night, holding a plasma blade in one hand and the alien warlord's unconscious breath in the other. The dawn over Thalmira did not arrive gently. It struck with the fury of twin suns bursting over the horizon, searing the valley with ultraviolet waves that boiled dew from stone and scorched the air to ash. Kalen stirred beneath the narrow overhang of the ruined ridge where fractured obsidian and heat-scoured shale offered the barest relief from the planetary incineration. Violira still lay motionless, though her breathing had grown steadier overnight. Her body had accepted the sealants and the dermal bonds held for now, but her leg was beyond field repair, and the crushed nerve clusters near her spinal crest would soon cascade into systemic failure if left untreated. The makeshift shelter stank of chemical accelerants and dried alien blood, but it held. Kalen rationed his final hydration pack between them, dripping the last of it onto her cracked lips, before pressing the intake tube against his own. The taste of rust and ozone spread across his tongue, a bitter symphony of survival. He moved with careful deliberation as the light rose. The cloak of darkness had shielded them from aerial drones and heat-seeking scouts. In the sun's return, every movement became a signal, every breath a liability. But the ruins around him, the fractured bones of civilization, offered one last card to play camouflage through collapse. He descended the ridge, navigating the pathways that machines had once built and men had once died protecting. Artificial canyons formed by snapped sky rails and derailed monorail spines offered concealment enough. Every so often he returned to the crevice, checking her vitals, applying another stabilizer patch, adjusting her armor to keep circulation steady. Her body responded slowly but persistently. The regenerative capabilities of her kind were superior but taxed. Her internal systems had begun to redirect energy toward neural retention, preserving cognition, even as the body faltered. The priorities of a warlord. By the second dusk, her eyes opened again, glassy but conscious. She tracked movement. She saw him. She knew. Still, Kalen moved wordlessly, a shadow at the edge of her awareness, tending wounds not his own. He carried her from the cave before the heat turned lethal, bearing her through the blasted trench where ancient turbines once fed the domed cities, now shattered under orbital bombardment. Her body pressed against his chest, like living armor too heavy for speed, too essential to abandon. In that march, something shifted. There was no ceremony, no sudden bloom of trust, only the gradual surrender of tension. Her fingers, once curled into reflexive fists, now lay open. Her breathing adapted to his rhythm, synchronizing unconsciously as the days bled into one another. He felt it in the moments between steps, how her weight no longer fought him, how the silence between them no longer felt sharp. They found a collapsed biodome at the base of the ridgeline. Shattered glass and biotech scaffolding tangled in a sunken crater of moss and carbon. The interior was choked with vine rot and fractured memory, but it held structure. A forgotten piece of the planet's former self left behind when war turned maintenance into myth. There Kalen built again. He salvaged a clean zone beneath the remains of a medical station, using the remnants of a sterilization ring to create a barrier against pathogens. He laid her there, stripped the armor from her damaged leg, and began the process of reduction and splinting. Her body responded with twitching agony, but no protest came. The days stretched, supplies dwindled, the pain sharpened. But her gaze remained. By the fourth night, she could sit upright. Her strength had not returned, but her will had carried on a spine that refused to bow to death or fate or species. In the stillness between breaths, Kalen observed her not as a soldier, but as something other. She moved with precision, even when weak. Her muscles twitched with learned instinct. Her presence filled the room even in silence. She was war-wrapped in myth, and yet beneath the layers there was something quieter. A scarred hunger for survival, for meaning beyond command. He did not speak, neither did she, but a ritual formed in that silence. A sharing of rations even when none remained. A repositioning of weight so that her wounded side rested against his back when she drifted into fevered sleep. A moment at dawn when their shoulders aligned, both staring toward the horizon that offered no promise. In the remnants of a forgotten ruin surrounded by ghosts of science and soil, the foundation of trust was not declared, it was earned. On the sixth morning, her hand found his wrist, not in demand, not in resistance, a simple resting of fingers, contact. And in that contact, Kalen felt the boundary fracture. No orders had authorized this, no doctrine could explain it. But there, beneath the ruins of war and law, a human soldier and an alien warlord became two figures moving not as strangers, not as saviors, but as survivors, together, carried forward not by design but by decision. The healing chamber had been buried beneath generations of dust and silence. Kalen found it by accident or perhaps by instinct when exploring deeper into the core of the biodome. A collapsed access corridor partially devoured by vine creep led into what remained of a medical research wing long abandoned by both war and memory. The structure had not been touched in decades. Crystalline interfaces blinked to life under his proximity, triggered by dormant biothermal sensors that still remembered the touch of sentient skin. The room was circular with recessed walls lined in hexagonal induction panels. At the center, a dual cradle interface glowed faintly, humming with low-frequency resonance that vibrated against bone. Kalen studied the console. The language was foreign alien script embedded with biosynthetic glyphs. But the layout was universal diagnostics, integrity readouts, energy flow. What mattered was function, and function had survived the centuries. The system required two. A single occupant would fail the sequence. The entire structure was designed for binary synchronization, biological integration between compatible neural matrices, a rare procedure even in human records. Among the Xerion race, it was legend. When he carried Valera into the chamber, she did not resist. Her gaze held no confusion, no fear, only understanding. He laid her in the first cradle, her body cradled by fluidic membranes that adjusted to her wounded form. Her breaths were shallow but steady. The machinery read her vitals and pulsed softly in response, scanning, adapting. Then came the decision. Kalen stood over the second cradle, breath heavy. The chamber's AI pinged him for confirmation, not in words, but in chemical pulses and heat. This was not healing. It was convergence. The integration of two lifeforms through neural harmonization designed not just to repair, but to bind. A last resort for diplomats and warriors alike, long thought lost to myth. He lowered himself into the second cradle. The membrane closed over him like warm silk and the hum intensified. Lights converged. The world disappeared. First came heat, then came sound, then came the unraveling. His body separated from itself, awareness disassembled and rewoven along lines he could not name. He felt his own breath as hers felt her pain bloom through his nerves like fire through frost. Memories bled between them not as visions but as sensations, emotions before words, moments before meanings. Her childhood under blood-red skies, the weight of crown training, the first time she held a blade. His first battlefield, the cold silence after a friend's final breath, the hunger that came not from the body, but from the soul. Time collapsed. Barriers dissolved. Thoughts no longer belonged to a single source. Instinct shifted into tandem. Heartbeats echoed in unity. Her injuries began to repair, not through medicine, but through fusion. His cells accelerated to match hers. Mitochondrial exchange. Genetic echo. A resonance only possible under complete neural transparency. The chamber did not just repair, it recalibrated. Then the core activated. Buried within the interface was an ancient protocol, one not meant to be triggered lightly. A failsafe from a war long past designed to preserve unity between species during extinction events. It searched for reproductive compatibility. It found more than expected. The interface signaled the beginning of bond imprinting. A biological tether formed between their neural networks. Not temporary, not reversible. Kalen's awareness flickered at the edge of itself. Something warm and electric spread from the base of his spine. Not lust, not pain, but a pulse of creation. Valera's mind met his in silence. She did not resist. The cradle flooded with light. Something ancient passed between them, older than war, deeper than command. Then the world returned. When the membranes released, the room felt larger, or perhaps smaller. The distance between their bodies had become irrelevant. Even with eyes closed, they felt each other. Kalen's muscles moved in response to her thoughts. Valera's heart beat in tandem with his breath. She sat up first. Strength returned in full. Her body bore no trace of trauma. Her skin shimmered iridescent beneath the overhead light. Kaelin rose a moment later, disoriented but intact. Their eyes met. No words passed. None were needed. They stepped from the chamber as something new. Not man and woman. Not soldier and commander, but bondmates. Linked. Changed. The desert wind beyond the dome howled with warning. Storms approached, and with them threats that neither one could name. But for the first time since the war began, Kaelin no longer felt like a singular being. He moved forward not alone, and the universe had just shifted around them. The storm broke just after nightfall. Kaelin and Valera stood side by side on the shattered walkway of the biodome's upper ridge, surveying the desolation beyond. Clouds thick with magnetized ash rolled over the plains, and each flash of lightning illuminated a wasteland sculpted by fire and time. But they did not flinch. Their minds were now threads in the same weave. Each thought mirrored each sensation shared through the bond that pulsed beneath their skin like a second heartbeat. The storm's approach wasn't what made them tense. It was the movement beneath it. Troop signatures unmarked but familiar. Dominion patrol units. Scanners blinked red across Kaelin's heads-up display, and Valera's implanted telemetry confirmed what the bond already told them: they were surrounded. Neither moved to retreat. In the span of minutes, they slipped into the shell of the dome's outer defense corridor. The old systems were long dead, but Kaelin's knowledge of battlefield tech and Valera's symbiotic link to dormant Xerian architecture allowed them to do something extraordinary. They awakened it, not with passwords or code strings, but with presence. Where one might have triggered a single subsystem, two connected minds forged a pathway. The energy grid coughed into partial life-shielding panels, flickered and recessed weapon caches extended from the walls with a hiss of old hydraulics. The dome, long silent, remembered war, and so did they. When the enemy descended, they were ready. Kaelin moved like a shadow, his limbs reacting before the mind fully processed. Each step, each turn of his shoulder was anticipated and echoed by Valera. When he flanked, she pressed forward. When she blocked, he struck. There was no need to communicate. Their bond fed each of them glimpses of the other's perception, shared sensory overlays, mutual awareness of angles, threats, motion. It was more than synergy. It was synthesis. The first wave of Dominion troops never stood a chance. They breached the perimeter, expecting resistance from scavengers or wounded survivors. What they found instead was an elegant warlord descending from the crumbling scaffold, blade in hand, and a human moving at her side like a mirrored ghost. Their weapons were crude by Dominion standards: repurposed rifles, scavenged blades, recharged grenades. But in their hands, every object became an extension of precision. A fallen pipe became a tripwire. A shattered console transformed into a pulse bomb relay. They did not merely fight, they orchestrated. The second wave arrived heavier. Drones shocked troops, low-orbit suppression cannons. The dome groaned under impact shields, crackling with overcharged plasma. But Kaelin and Valera had already anticipated this. Their minds, linked through the cradle's resonance, processed probabilities together. They plotted movements 3 steps ahead, adjusting without speech, adapting without friction. She anticipated pressure points in the enemy's ranks. He calculated range and blast radii. Where she wounded, he finished. Where he distracted, she decimated. In the narrow corridors of the defense wing, they were gods wrapped in mortal flesh. At the height of battle, the bond pulsed with something deeper. Kaelin felt it first, not a thought, but a sensation beneath thought. A new warmth in the shared space between them. Not physical, not quite. A flicker, a rhythm. A thrum that did not come from him, nor from her, but from something forming between. Valera felt it an instant later, and for the first time their motion faltered not in weakness, but in awe. The cradle had not merely bound them, it had seeded something. A pulse within the pulse, a third beat not yet separate but distinctly alive. It did not slow them, it sharpened them. With renewed fury they turned the tide. The final enemy detachment collapsed under calculated demolition. Kaelin overrode the biodome's last failsafe, collapsing a support pylon onto the advancing line, and Valera carved the remaining strike captain from his command mech with a plasma halberd taken from a fallen elite. When it ended, they stood amid smoking wreckage surrounded by sparks and dust and silence. Their hands met not as an embrace, not yet, but as an anchor. Their bodies were bruised. Blood painted their armor in stripes of red and gold, but their eyes remained steady. They had survived alone before. Now they had survived together. And the war had just changed. Somewhere in the fragments of that storm, Enemy comms would carry whispers of what had happened. Some would say it was strategy, others would speak of ghosts, but the truth was far stranger. Two minds, one pulse, a fusion neither side had foreseen, and deep within them something new now stirred. The wind on the upper plateau shifted direction 3 hours before the sky did. Kalen noticed it first, an irregularity in the pressure signatures, a subtle shift in dust density. Valera, already synchronizing her spatial awareness with his, through the bond felt the tremor before it reached the surface. It wasn't natural, it was a deployment signature. Massive, coordinated, accelerated. The Dominion Pact had returned, but not as a recon unit or scavenger patrol. This time it was a full-scale reclamation strike. They moved quickly. Kalen and Valera abandoned the broken biodome before the drones arrived. By the time the enemy occupied the ruins, the two had already crossed the basin ridge into the fractured steppe network below, a region long dismissed as uninhabitable due to seismic instability and magnetic interference. It was precisely why it was perfect. Here, their advantage became absolute. Each step across the scarred terrain fed information into their bodies in ways that defied physics. Kalen's reflexes worked through Valera's senses. Valera's spatial orientation adapted through Kalen's predictive algorithms. The bond no longer functioned as a tether. It was a tactical organism, alive, learning, growing. The terrain became part of them. The enemy became part of the plan. Old battlefield remains littered. The landscape, half-buried, pulse arrays, dormant drone cores, crashed signal towers. Kalen repurposed the technology with a level of ingenuity no military protocol had ever taught. He reconfigured a broken plasma launcher into a proximity mine using Valera's knowledge of Dominion failsafes. She reactivated a silenced communications spike using Kalen's encryption overlay, broadcasting decoy signatures that scattered enemy triangulation. The Dominion was fast, but the bond was faster. They lured the vanguard into a shallow basin, let the terrain funnel them into a natural kill zone. Dozens of enemy units stormed forward expecting soft targets. Instead, they found fire from 3 angles and a collapse charge that buried their armor in stone. But this was no longer a skirmish. This was the opening movement of a new campaign. The strike commander, Drexen Vol, a hardliner from the Dominion's old guard, recognized the pattern. His orbiting command ship initiated a surface-wide lockdown, calling in reinforcements from 2 outer moons. Within hours, the full strength of Dominion war doctrine descended on Thalmyra like a second extinction. Kalen and Valera didn't retreat. They countered. In the command hub of a collapsed satellite array buried beneath kilometers of dry crust, the two synchronized their mental maps. Their neural connection allowed for simultaneous tactical processing across multiple battlefields, calculating troop movement, predicting enemy formations, integrating data from captured drones. Their influence spread beyond their physical location. Refugee enclaves across the steppes received encrypted instructions via the same broadcast relays Kalen had rigged. Saboteurs, insurgents, scavengers, former enemies, and deserters found themselves drawn into a cohesive plan. Not by command, but by inspiration. Not by fear, but by possibility. Word spread. The Ghost Warlord had returned. But this time, she wasn't alone. The Dominion's command net buzzed with confusion. Intelligence analysts flagged irregular resistance patterns. Tactical officers questioned how ancient infrastructure was coordinating battlefield outcomes with precision unseen in years. No one could explain how 2 fugitives had turned the tide of a planetary siege in less than a cycle. But the bond didn't care for explanation. It only required motion. Kalen adapted stolen Dominion mech code into an aerial support drone. Valera rigged a gravity well to collapse an enemy deployment drop. Together, they infiltrated a forward operations base synchronized with its defense grid and turned it inward in under 10 minutes. Victory, however, was never their goal. They had something greater: unity. For the first time since the beginning of the war, a human and a Xerion stood not as symbols of conquest, but as proof of convergence. Their bond echoed through others lesser in scope, but no less meaningful. Old rivalries softened. Distrust turned to hesitation. Hesitation turned to hope. And somewhere beneath the ash-choked sky, that flicker of change began to burn. The child they hadn't yet named, still forming, still uncertain, became more than potential. It became a promise. A seed from 2 worlds long at war. One pulse, one future. The last Dominion ship left Thalmyra under the cover of darkness, its engines flickering like dying stars across the black sky. It did not retreat out of mercy nor out of failure, but because the cost of staying had become unknowable. No algorithm could predict the outcome of fighting a force that wasn't built on numbers or weaponry, but on synchrony, on something beyond logic. Kalen and Valera watched the ship vanish from the cliffside that once held a Dominion beacon, now twisted and silent. The sands below bore the scars of the war they had ended, not with overwhelming firepower, but with the unbearable pressure of something the Dominion could not replicate. Unity. Around them, the survivors gathered. Zerion soldiers once loyal to Valera's command returned not in armor, but in quiet reverence. Human operatives once deployed to eliminate her stood now beside her, their rifles slung, their postures lowered. Engineers, scavengers, orphans of war, all drawn to the impossibility they had witnessed. They had seen two minds move as one. They had seen the battlefield reshaped not by domination but by cooperation. Valera no longer wore the crest of command. Her obsidian armor remained, but the sigil of her house had faded, whether by time or by choice. Kalen's uniform was gone, burned away in the last assault. What remained was simpler, a belt of tools, a salvaged transmitter, and the bond that shimmered between them like a field of invisible light. The child had not yet spoken, nor kicked, nor breathed, but its presence radiated between them. In every step, every glance, every moment of stillness, the pulse could be felt. Not as a burden, as a beacon. The others began to follow. A new camp emerged at the mouth of the shattered river valley where fresh water still trickled beneath the scorched rock. Habitats formed from wreckage and ambition. Shared language developed hybrid phrases born of military code, ancient prayer, and desperate invention. The technology of both species began to merge, not as trophies, but as tools redesigned for shared survival. From orbit, the planetary surface looked the same, still cracked, still hostile. But something beneath had shifted. Delegates arrived from outpost moons and neighboring systems, not warships, envoys. They came with questions, offerings, doubts. They came because the collapse of Dominion rule had left a vacuum, and the only consistent signal now emanated from Thalmira's rebuilt towers, a broadcast pulse matching 2 heartbeats repeating every 40 seconds. Not a command, a rhythm. Within the heart of the valley, Kalen constructed a field matrix calibrated to the unique frequency of their bond. Valera infused it with living code, Zerion genetic encryption, written not in logic, but in intention. The result was neither shield nor weapon. It was an interface. Those who stepped into its radius felt something, not control, connection. The change did not happen overnight. Suspicion lingered. Old hatreds flared and cooled. But the bond had set a precedent. One mind could speak many languages. One union could bridge warring skies. And somewhere within the reinforced medical wing of the central habitat, the child grew. Neither Kalen nor Valera knew what the child would become. Human Zerion. Something new. It did not matter. What mattered was the future stretching before them, vast, undefined, and waiting to be shaped not by conquest, but by choice. At night, they stood together beneath Thalmira's moons, her hand in his, the world quiet at last. No oaths were spoken, no flags were raised. But in the silence, a civilization began. The story you've just experienced of Kalen and Valera of a battlefield turned into a bond, and of 2 minds forging something greater than war represents a vision of what science fiction does best. It dares to imagine connection where there was once only conflict. Through shared danger, impossible decisions, and the awakening of something both ancient and new. These characters remind us that unity isn't born from treaties. It's forged in fire, carried on backs through broken worlds, and sealed in moments of silent trust. In this tale of war, survival, and transformation, what began as a hostile encounter bloomed into a symbol of interspecies harmony. From neural bonds to unborn futures, Kalen and Valera show us that evolution isn't just biological, it's emotional, political, spiritual. If this story resonated with you, inspired you, or simply gave you a glimpse into a different kind of galaxy, please like, comment, and subscribe to support more long-form cinematic science fiction. Your voice helps fuel stories like this, and your presence helps grow a community that thrives on bold ideas and emotional depth. Until next time, stay strange, stay brave, and always follow the pulse of the impossible.